Single dad checked basement lights at 2 a.m. The CEO, in a hoodie, said, "It's warm when you're here." The storm had rolled in fast that night, sweeping across the city like a curtain of steel-gray sorrow. Rain hammered the rooftop of the Sterling Tower, and lightning danced through the glass high above. Down in the maintenance office, tucked behind a loading bay, Noah Green pulled on his damp jacket, the edges frayed like his nerves. His work boots squelched slightly as he stood, the call just received still echoing in his ears. Panel D in the basement tripped again. "Lights are flickering. Might be water. Check it out." Noah glanced at the clock. 2:46 a.m. Ella would be asleep wrapped in the weighted blanket he'd bought from a second-hand store last winter. Her asthma had kept her up the past few nights, and tonight was the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. He didn't want to leave her, but the job was the job, and the job was what kept the rent paid and her medication coming. He grabbed his flashlight and toolbox and headed down the concrete steps to the sublevel. The elevator didn't go to this floor. You had to know the stairwell, the smell of mildew and metal getting stronger with each descending step. The lights here were motion sensor, and tonight they were lagging, flickering slowly to life in jerky stutters like a memory trying to form. Panel D was tucked into a side wall near a section of unused storage behind a rusted chain-link gate. The water leak had likely come from a nearby pipe. Noah crouched and inspected the wiring, definitely damp. As he reached for the breaker box, he heard it. A voice, very faint. 8, 9, 10. He turned slowly, squinting into the darkness behind the gate. A flashlight clicked on not his. It was dim-weak, like the last breath of a dying battery. The beam hovered low, then lifted to reveal her. A woman sat on the concrete floor, knees drawn to her chest, her back against the wall. Her hoodie was too large, the sleeves pulled over her hands. She wasn't frightened. She didn't startle when he found her. She looked at him like she'd been waiting. Noah hesitated. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She didn't answer right away. The cassette recorder beside her crackled and repeated, 8, 9, 10. Then a soft click as it rewound. "I thought I fixed that panel," he said, unsure why he was speaking, unsure why his voice had gone so soft. The woman looked up. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. Not recently, anyway. "The lights keep failing," she said. "Down here they always do." Noah studied her face in the weak glow. Early 40s, maybe late 30s. Not homeless, not disoriented. Just still. A stillness too controlled to be accidental. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slightly damp flannel scarf. "It's cold," he offered. "This isn't much, but..." She didn't take it, not at first. She looked at it like it was something sacred. "You don't even know who I am," she said. Noah tilted his head. "Does that matter? It's 50 degrees in here and there's standing water." A faint smile touched her lips. She took the scarf gently and wrapped it around herself without a word. Then, as if the gesture unlocked something, she added, "My son used to count like that. Over and over, like he was holding the world together with numbers." Noah lowered himself to sit careful not to slip on the damp floor. "He's got a good voice," he said, nodding toward the tape recorder. The woman turned it off. "It's all I have left of him." Silence blanketed the space, but it wasn't heavy, it was honest, raw. Noah knew grief. He carried it in his chest like an extra lung always aching. His wife, Grace, had died when Ella was 2. An aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. Just one day a voicemail, and the next silence. Sometimes he said quietly, "I think silence is worse than noise. At least with noise you can tell yourself someone's still there." The woman turned to him, eyes glimmering in the dim light. "You're the first person who didn't ask me to leave." Noah shrugged. "You don't look like trouble." She let out a soft breath. "That's the thing about grief, it doesn't wear a uniform." The lights above flickered again. Noah stood. "I should finish fixing the panel before something shorts again. You'll be okay." She nodded. "I'm not really here, you know. Not officially. I won't tell if you won't." He bent to open the breaker box. Wires sparked faintly. The woman spoke once more so soft it almost got swallowed by the hum of the wiring. "It's warm. When you're here." He froze, then turned slightly toward her. But she was already curling back into herself, the scarf now close around her like armor. Noah reset the breaker. The lights steadied. The flicker died out. But something else had sparked instead, quiet, fragile, real. He looked back one last time before leaving. The tape recorder lay silent beside her. And for a moment she looked like a statue carved out of grief and memory, grounded not by stone, but by something else. Something warmer. When he stepped back into the stairwell, he didn't know her name, but somehow she knew his. The next night, Noah arrived early. He told himself it was because the boiler on the 6th floor had been acting up, or that the new security lights needed rechecking, or that maybe, just maybe, he was tired of staring at the same ceiling alone while Ella coughed herself to sleep in the next room. But the truth sat heavier than any toolbox he carried. He wanted to know if the woman in the basement had been real. He descended the familiar stairwell, boots echoing down the narrow shaft. The building above was sleeping executives' long-gone cubicles, empty, the city's heartbeat softened by midnight rain. But down here, everything felt alive in a different way. Raw, honest, unfiltered by polite hallway greetings or company policy. When he opened the basement door, the air greeted him with the same chill. The lights flickered again, delayed like reluctant eyes opening from a long sleep. But she wasn't there. The same corner lay empty. No hoodie, no faint glow of a dying flashlight, no tape recorder whispering numbers from the past. Noah set down his bag, exhaled, and looked around. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The space felt hollow now, like something meaningful had visited and left behind only the echo of what could have been. He walked to the panel tools in hand, but his attention was distracted by something small tucked behind a utility crate near the wall. A thermos. Still warm when he touched it. He unscrewed the lid. Peppermint tea. Noah blinked. That wasn't left by accident. He scanned the floor. Near the spot where she'd sat the night before, faint outlines of footprints marked the damp concrete, slightly smudged but unmistakably recent. She'd been here. Maybe minutes ago. He settled on the concrete step, thermos in hand, and waited. Time passed. An hour, maybe 2. He didn't look at his watch. It was enough to be still for once, to let the night breathe around him. He almost forgot about everything else, about rent, asthma inhalers, the overtime that never seemed to come. He had just decided to leave when a voice called from the dark behind him. "You waited." Noah turned. Noah. She stood by the door, hood down now. Her hair was pinned loosely, raindrops glinting like stars in the strands. Her posture wasn't defensive anymore. It was thoughtful, cautious. "You left tea," he said. Seemed like a promise. She smiled, just a shadow of one. "You're not like the others. I take it you've met a lot of janitors." "I've met a lot of people," she said, stepping closer. "Most of them either want something or want to run from something. And I'm neither." "You're still. That's rare." He motioned to the empty step beside him. She hesitated just long enough to make him wonder if she'd leave again. But then she sat, tucking her legs beneath her, mirroring the exact position from the night before. For a moment, they didn't speak. Then Noah asked softly, "What was his name?" She turned to him, eyes softening. "Eli," she said. "He was 5. Noah nodded. "Mine's Ella. She's 6 now, born with bronchial asthma. Some days are good. Some days feel like holding your breath for hours, waiting for her to take hers." A silence settled again, this one not hollow but reverent, as though the basement itself had paused to listen. "I lost Eli 3 years ago," she said. He touched a broken heater switch in an old rental unit. The landlord had ignored 4 warnings. I was on a conference call overseas. You blame yourself. Wouldn't you? Noah looked down at his hands. Every night. I worked a second job when my wife died. I always thought if I'd been there. She interrupted, but gently. It wouldn't have mattered. He glanced at her. She wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't saying it to soothe. She was saying it because she knew. Do you come down here often? He asked. It's the only part of the building they haven't redesigned. It's untouched and broken. Like me, I guess. Noah leaned back against the wall. Sometimes I think broken things are the only things worth fixing. At least they're honest. She laughed softly, a dry, hushed sound like wind passing through autumn leaves. I don't even know your name, she said. Noah. She looked at him. Fitting. You fix what's flooding. And you. A pause. Then Evelyn. It landed between them with unexpected weight. Now she was real. No longer a mystery in the dark. Evelyn. The name sounded strong, timeless, like it belonged to someone who had weathered storms long before this one. Are you supposed to be here? He asked, watching her carefully now. No, she admitted. But I'm not supposed to be gone either. This is the only place I still feel tethered. To Eli, to myself. The tea had gone cold between them, but neither moved to leave. Noah didn't need to know the rest. Not yet. The building she stood atop during the day was a fortress. This basement was her confession box. You know, he said as he stood to go, this place may be broken, but at least it listens. Evelyn looked up at him. And you? He smiled gently. I listen too. She watched him walk to the stairwell door, toolbox in hand. But just before he reached it, she called out once more, quieter than before, but clear. You can come back. If you want. Noah nodded without turning. Only if you promise not to disappear again. She didn't promise, but she didn't say no, and for now, that was enough. The following week passed in a slow unraveling of quiet encounters. Noah didn't tell anyone about Evelyn. He carried her name like a stone, warmed in his pocket, grounding personal, not for show. She never asked him to come back, not explicitly, but the thermos kept reappearing, and so did she. They spoke in low tones beneath buzzing bulbs, surrounded by cold pipes and flickering shadows. Down in the basement, neither of them had to perform. There were no job titles, no expectations, no pasts that demanded explanation, only presence. And in that presence, something fragile began to take root. Tonight, she was already there when he arrived. She was sitting cross-legged on the same concrete step hoodie draped across her knees. The tape recorder was gone. In its place, she held a small sketch pad, her pencil gliding over the page with gentle intent. Didn't know you could draw? Noah said as he entered, his voice softer than usual. She didn't look up. I don't really, but sometimes it helps me remember. He set down his bag and crouched beside her. The drawing was of a tree, simple, childlike, but near the roots a tiny boy stood with arms raised, trying to touch the branches. Eli. She nodded. He used to call trees upside-down rivers. Said the roots drank from the ground and the branches poured into the sky. Noah smiled. That's beautiful. He was. A pause settled between them. Not awkward, more like reverence. Evelyn closed the sketch pad and leaned her head back against the cold wall. Her breath fogged in the air. I haven't been able to draw anything since he passed, she said. Until I met you. Noah blinked. Me. You talk like everything matters, even things people step over. Like the way you describe fixing wires as if you're calming them down, not just repairing them. I guess. When life falls apart, you notice the pieces more, he said. She turned to him, eyes narrowed in something almost like gratitude. It's not just noticing. It's respecting. That's different. He didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever described him that way before, not his former bosses, not even Grace. Most people saw him as the guy with calloused hands and circles under his eyes. a decent worker, a quiet father, no more, no less. But Evelyn saw him in layers. Not what he did, but how he did it. That meant something. She drew her knees closer to her chest. I never told anyone this, but the day Eli died, I was supposed to be home. I told my assistant I needed 1 more hour on the call with Tokyo. I thought I had time. Noah stayed quiet. Let her speak. When they found him, he was still holding the little plastic screwdriver from his toy set. He thought he could fix it, like Mommy always does. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She pressed her lips together as if emotion had to earn its way out. "I would give anything to go back," she whispered. Noah gently reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was a little crumpled, but he unfolded it with care. "This is Ella," he said, handing it to her. In the photo, a 6-year-old girl with messy curls and bright eyes grinned while holding up a small snow globe. "She collects them," he said. "Says they're little memories trapped in time." Evelyn studied the image like it was sacred. She looks happy. She is. But she misses her mom. And I miss the version of myself I used to be. Evelyn handed back the photo. "Maybe we don't lose ourselves. Maybe we just get covered in dust, and someone shows up with a cloth and wipes a little part clean again." Noah chuckled softly. "That might be the most poetic thing I've heard in a basement." They sat in shared silence again. Pipes hissed in the walls and something dripped in the far corner. But it wasn't lonely. It was almost safe. "I should probably go soon," she murmured. "I have an early board meeting." "Do they know you sneak off to cry with the janitor?" he teased lightly. She laughed, a real one this time. "They wouldn't understand. They don't know this version of me." "Which one?" "The one that doesn't have to be in charge all the time." Noah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know, you don't have to disappear every time things get hard. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm just here." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. There was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. Less armor, more ache, and trust. "I know," she said. "That's why I keep coming back." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small thermos he'd brought this time. "Trade you," he said. "I made chamomile." She grinned. "Deal." They sipped tea in silence until the clock ticked past 3:30. Then Evelyn stood dusting off her pants. Before she turned to go, she paused. "You fix wires, Noah. But you also fix something else. Don't ever forget that." He watched her disappear into the stairwell shadows. And though the lights still flickered overhead, Noah swore the basement didn't feel so dark anymore. Noah came in early again the next night. He didn't bring tools this time, only the excuse that the panel might need another look. But when he reached the basement stairwell, the keypad lock blinked red. He tried again. Same result. The door didn't open. Noah frowned. The basement had never been locked from his side before. Not unless maintenance orders were issued from upper management, rare, especially at this hour. He tapped the intercom, but no one answered. Back in the control office, he scanned the logs. A new entry had been added, restricted access sublevel locked for electrical audit. An audit that wasn't standard. Not at this time of night. Not without notice. And definitely not without informing the guy who was supposed to be the one auditing things. He checked again. Under requester, the name was listed Richard Camden, head of security. Noah's stomach turned. He didn't like Camden. No one did. The man had a jaw made of concrete and eyes like searchlights. The kind who saw the world in threat levels and protocol breaches. Evelyn had once mentioned that she tolerated him out of necessity. But now something felt off. He spent the rest of the shift above ground, restless. As dawn crept across the skyline, Noah finally returned home where Ella was just waking up. She sat on the couch in her dinosaur pajamas, holding her inhaler like a teddy bear. "Did you fix the lights again, Daddy?" He ruffled her curls. "Not tonight, kiddo." Someone locked the door. Ella scrunched her face. Why would someone lock a basement? He didn't answer, but in his chest unease grew like a vine tightening. 2 days passed. The basement remained locked. No messages, no thermos, no Evelyn. It was like she'd vanished. On the third night, he made an excuse to Camden, said he'd heard reports of flickering lights again, might need to check the lower systems. Camden didn't even look up from his clipboard. Sublevels off limits for now. Why? Orders from the top. Noah stared. Who at the top? Camden finally looked up. His voice was dry, measured. Sometimes the less you know, the longer you last around here. Something in Noah's stomach dropped. He walked away without pressing further, but the question haunted him. Had Evelyn been found down there? Had someone reported her? Was Camden trying to silence something? Or was she gone because she chose to be? The following evening, Noah waited near the freight elevator at the back of the building. It was mostly unused after midnight, a good place to watch the stairs without being obvious. He saw her just past 2 a.m. Evelyn, dressed in business black this time. No hoodie, no sketchpad, a stranger's version of the woman he'd met in the dark. She exited the elevator alone, but her steps were slower than usual and her eyes darted cautious. Noah called her name low and urgent. She turned eyes wide, not angry, not surprised, just tired. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Neither should you. But we were, he said, together. What happened? She glanced down the corridor, then motioned him into the nearby janitor's closet. Once inside, with the door shut and only the faint light from his keyring bulb, her shoulders dropped. I didn't tell them, she said. I didn't say anything about you. Noah's heart pounded. Then why is the basement locked? I think Camden saw me. There's a motion camera feed I forgot about. He didn't confront me, but he mentioned unauthorized usage of private space. And you didn't defend it, I did. But there's only so far I can go before it becomes suspicious. She leaned against the wall, voice tight. They already think I'm unstable. 3 months ago, I delayed a merger because I couldn't concentrate. I'm being watched, evaluated. Noah felt a mix of frustration and something worse, helplessness. And so, what you're human. You lost your son. You grieve. That's not instability, Evelyn. Not in your world, maybe. But up there, she pointed toward the ceiling. Grief is weakness. Stillness is incompetence. Kindness is risk. She closed her eyes. I wasn't supposed to get attached. I just wanted a place to disappear. You ruined that. There it was. The sting. But she wasn't finished. And I'm glad, she said. Because for the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me. The light flickered slightly above them. She stepped closer. But if I stay down there with you, I lose everything I've built. Every piece of armor I've welded together since Eli died. Noah met her gaze. Then let it go. Maybe what you're holding on to isn't saving you. It's burying you. She looked away. A single breath escaped like it hurt to let go. I can't fix you, he continued, and I'm not asking you to fix me. But maybe we're both allowed to exist in the same broken place, without shame, without permission. A long pause followed. I've wanted to tell someone, she whispered. Everything. Not to be rescued. Just to be believed. Noah nodded. Then tell me. Anytime. Anywhere. Her eyes watered, but she wiped them quickly. Camden's filing a report, she said. About me. About inappropriate conduct with staff. He doesn't have evidence, but he knows how to twist shadows into proof. Noah's fists clenched. I'll speak up. I'll know. That would only make it worse. For both of us. Her voice cracked, but she recovered. Promise me you won't say anything. Please. He swallowed hard. Okay. She took his hand. Her touch was cool, trembling, but real. Thank you for giving me the only space I didn't have to lie. She opened the closet door slowly. Light flooded in. I have to go. When will I see you again? I don't know. she said already, walking away. But just before she turned the corner, she looked back and whispered, "The basement may be locked, but I remember every light you fixed." Then she was gone. And for the first time since Grace died, Noah realized something had broken in him again. Not from loss, but from the fear of losing someone he hadn't even had the chance to hold on to yet. The lobby looked different in the daylight. Polished marble floors, gold trim elevators, voices that echoed with importance. Noah never liked it. It reminded him of how invisible he was up here, how much more comfortable he felt below where the floors creaked and the pipes leaked, and no one expected him to wear a smile or a tie. But today, he wasn't on a maintenance run. He stood near the receptionist's desk holding a small envelope in his hand. Inside was the picture Ella had drawn, a simple crayon-colored basement with yellow lights, a cup of tea, and 3 stick figures, Noah, Ella, and a woman with a gray hoodie labeled E. The drawing had appeared in his lunchbox that morning with a note written in awkward 6-year-old cursive. Maybe she forgot how to smile. You can give it back to her. Now here he was, unsure what he was even trying to accomplish. The receptionist barely looked up. "Can I help you? I just wanted to drop something off. For Evelyn Langford." The woman blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, just a note. Personal." She gave him the once-over. Tool belt, scuffed boots, his name stitched in faded thread across his shirt. Whatever she thought of him, she didn't say it out loud. "I'll check if she's in." But as the woman turned, the elevator doors behind them slid open with a soft chime. Evelyn stepped out, flanked by 2 board members and a fast-talking assistant with a tablet. Her hair was up her blazer crisp. She looked nothing like the woman who had once whispered stories in the basement, and yet her eyes found him instantly. For a split second, the noise of the lobby faded. Everything else blurred, just them suspended in that moment. Then it shattered. One of the men said something, and Evelyn looked away. Her pace didn't break. She passed Noah without a word, without even a glance back. He stood still, envelope clenched in his hand. The receptionist noticed. "She's in back-to-back meetings today." "I'm sorry." Noah nodded, jaw tight. "I'll just leave this." He placed the envelope gently on the counter and walked away. Back in the maintenance room, Noah sat beside his toolbox in silence. Around him, the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant clank of vents filled the air. Stillness wasn't peace today. It was pressure. Dense and unwelcome. He hadn't expected a public embrace. Not even a hello. But the way she passed him like he didn't exist felt colder than any locked basement ever had. He pulled out the photograph of Ella again. Her toothy grin still made him smile even now. He thought about what he would tell her later. Sometimes people disappear even when they're standing right in front of you. That night he returned home earlier than usual. Ella sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by glitter glue and cereal boxes. Her latest invention, a wish box complete with pink duct tape hinges. "Did she like the drawing?" she asked eagerly. Noah paused. "I think she saw it." Ella looked up. "But..." Did she smile? He knelt beside her. "Not today, sweetheart. Maybe she needs more pictures," she said seriously. "Or a joke. People laugh when I tell jokes." He chuckled and kissed the top of her head. "You're the best medicine I've got." Ella leaned into him. "I think she'll come back, if you keep the lights on." 2 more days passed. No calls, no thermos, no word. Noah tried to focus on his work. Broken sinks, leaky ducts, a cracked tile near the 12th floor stairwell. But everything reminded him of her. Then on Thursday, something changed. He was called to the executive floor to replace a damaged light panel near the corner office. Not unusual, but the request had come under a different name. Not Evelyn's, not Camden's, just a generic system request, lighting adjustment office 42G. Noah took the call. He climbed the stairs slowly, toolbox in hand, not expecting anything. Maybe hoping just enough to hurt. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. He knocked once, then twice. No answer. He keyed in with the general override and stepped inside. The room was dim, curtains drawn. A desk sat near the window papers, scattered untouched coffee cooling on the side. On the wall, a framed photograph of a boy, curly-haired mid-laugh running through autumn leaves. Eli. Noah exhaled softly. Behind him, a door creaked. Evelyn stepped in from the private office attached to the suite, not in a blazer now, but in a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She froze when she saw him. Noah. He straightened. The light report came through. I didn't know it was you. Her eyes softened. I asked them to send someone. I didn't know if you'd come. Silence wrapped around them, thick with things left unsaid. I saw the drawing, she said finally. Ella's. I wasn't trying to make a scene, he said. I just thought maybe it would remind you what mattered. Evelyn walked slowly to the desk, picked up the drawing. She traced her finger along the crayon lines. I kept it, she whispered. I've looked at it every night. It's the only thing on this floor that feels like it's telling the truth. She looked up at him, then no shields. No performance. I didn't ignore you in the lobby, she said. I couldn't afford to be seen needing someone. Noah met her gaze. You don't have to need me, but you can trust me. That's different. A pause. Then Evelyn walked to him. Close now. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a familiar object, an old cassette recorder. I thought I'd lost this. Noah smiled gently. It was never really gone, just waiting. She stared at the recorder, then at him. Something shifted in her eyes like a window had finally opened. I want to go back down there, she said, to where I stopped pretending. Noah didn't move. Then let's unlock the door. And just like that, something new began. Not in the boardroom, not in her title, but in the space between grief and grace where two broken people had once met under flickering lights. The elevator dinged at exactly 2:07 a.m. Noah stepped out first, toolbox in hand, even though neither of them expected to fix anything tonight. Evelyn followed close behind, wearing jean sneakers and that gray hoodie he'd almost forgotten how much he missed. The basement door had been unlocked earlier that day, no warning, no explanation. Just quietly removed from Camden's restricted list as if someone up top had either relented or been told subtly to back off. Noah suspected Evelyn had something to do with it. They walked down the stairwell in silence, side by side, their steps echoing in soft sync. When they reached the bottom, Evelyn hesitated before pushing open the door. Her fingers hovered just a moment over the handle. Then she turned to him. It might feel different now. He nodded. Different isn't always bad. The door creaked open. The room smelled the same, like damp concrete and rust and forgotten time. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the faint scent of chamomile she'd brought in her thermos. Or maybe it was just the fact that she wasn't hiding anymore. They stepped inside together. She looked around like someone visiting the grave of an old friend. Reverent. Cautious. Her gaze paused at the far wall where the tape recorder had once rested. She walked over and knelt down, fingertips brushing the ground. Right here, she whispered. Noah remained still, letting her have the moment. This was the first place I said his name out loud again, she said. Eli. After months of pretending I didn't have a past. Noah set the toolbox down gently. You don't have to pretend anymore. She looked back at him. I know, and that scares me more than anything. He crouched beside her. Because if you stop pretending, the grief comes back. No, she said, because then I have to decide what comes next. Silence followed, but it wasn't hollow. It was full of consideration of weight. Evelyn pulled the cassette recorder from her hoodie pocket and placed it back on the ground. Then she clicked it on. 7, 8, 9. The child's voice crackled through the basement like a hymn. She closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Noah watched, not intruding. letting the weight of her world settle back where it belonged. Then she spoke again, her voice low but steady. "I used to come down here to disappear. And now. She opened her eyes. "I come here to remember." She turned off the recorder. Noah sat beside her, back against the wall. "I still talk to Grace sometimes," he admitted. Not out loud. Just in the quiet. When Ella falls asleep. I tell her about the things I got wrong that day. Evelyn glanced over. "She was your wife." He nodded. "She died when Ella was 2. Brain aneurysm. No warning. She just didn't come home from work one night." Evelyn exhaled a long breath that seemed to hold the weight of shared sorrow. "You must have felt like the world stopped turning." "I did. For a while I thought if I stayed still enough time might reverse itself." "And did it?" "No," he said with a soft, broken laugh. "But it taught me that stillness isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes it's the only way to hear yourself again." She looked at him with something like awe. "You always speak like that, like you're not just saying things, you're stitching them." He shrugged. "Words are all I've got some nights." A pause. Then, like a shift in temperature, Evelyn said, "Camden submitted a formal report against me." Noah tensed. On what grounds he cited inappropriate interaction with staff and abuse of restricted property. Said I was compromising the building's safety by engaging in personal meetings off record. He clenched his fists. "That's absurd. All we did was talk. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know that," she said, "but truth doesn't always win when people have agendas. So, what now?" I resigned. Noah turned sharply. "What?" She nodded. "Effective next week. I'm stepping down as CEO." He stared at her, unable to mask the hurt in his eyes. "Because of me, no. Because of me," she said firmly. "I've been wearing a mask for years. Not just since Eli. Longer. I built this company to prove I wasn't weak after my divorce, that I could lead, outperform, succeed. But somewhere along the way I forgot what I actually valued." She stood now, pacing slowly. "I'm tired of surviving in rooms where I can't breathe, and more than anything I want to live a life Eli would be proud of." Noah rose, too. "And what does that life look like?" She looked up at him. "Simpler. More honest. Maybe with people who aren't afraid to drink tea in basements." He smiled at that. "You're not angry?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, I'm proud of you." Evelyn stepped closer. "I don't know where this leaves us, Noah. I don't know what's next." He held her gaze. "That's okay. I'm not going anywhere. I've built my life around staying when it's hard." She took his hand. Her fingers were cold but steady, and in that moment neither of them needed promises. They just needed presence. The light above them flickered, then steadied. For once, the wires didn't need fixing. Sometimes the current just needed time to connect. The email hit the building like a thunderclap. At 9:03 a.m., Monday morning, every employee in Sterling Tower received the same concise message from the board of directors. Effective immediately, Evelyn Langford will be stepping down as CEO. We thank her for her service and leadership. There was no explanation, no farewell party, just silence like someone had pulled the power from the building's heart. Noah read the message on his cracked phone screen as he leaned against a stairwell railing on the 3rd floor. His breath caught in his throat, though he'd known it was coming. Still, seeing it final black and white official made it real in a way that tugged at something deeper than logic. The whispers started fast. Secretaries murmuring in break rooms. Security guards trading glances. Executives with tight jaws and fake smiles acting as though nothing had shifted when everything had. Noah didn't care about their opinions, but what he didn't expect, what blindsided him, was the wave of coldness that followed. That afternoon, he returned to the maintenance hub to find a notice pinned to the wall. A formal HR letter. Subject: Personnel Observation Review. Your recent interactions with senior staff have raised concerns regarding professional boundaries. Please be advised that additional oversight will be in place pending review. Noah stared at the paper, his jaw tightening. He didn't need to guess who had authored this. Camden's fingerprints were all over it, polite enough to pass legal, but sharp enough to threaten. That night he arrived home later than usual. Ella was already curled up on the couch with her sketch pad waiting for him. "Did she leave?" she asked quietly without looking up. Noah sat beside her, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah. Today. Did she say goodbye?" He hesitated. "Not yet." Ella pressed the crayons harder against the paper. "Maybe she doesn't know how." He swallowed hard. "Maybe." Ella turned the page and began drawing a house this time. 3 windows, a crooked roof smoke rising from the chimney in purple crayon. "She could live here," she said. "It's not big, but it has a backyard." Noah smiled through the ache in his chest. She'd like that. The next night, Noah returned to the basement. He wasn't even sure why. Habit, maybe. Or hope. The space felt emptier than usual. As if her absence had taken more than her presence, it had taken the silence with her too. He sat in their usual spot, poured himself tea from the last thermos she'd left, and stared at the wall where her son's drawing had once hung. He remembered her voice from that night I come here to remember. Now he understood something else. She also left to survive. The following morning, as Noah walked through the north corridor, Camden stepped out from the security room. He blocked the hallway casually, arms folded across his barrel chest. "We need to talk." Noah kept walking. Camden's voice followed. "You think I don't know what's going on? You think a janitor whispering sweet words in dark corners can't sink a company?" Noah turned eyes steady. "You mean a grieving mother found one place she could breathe, and you couldn't stand not being the one in control?" Camden smirked. "You're not above policy. You work with your hands. Stay in your lane." Noah's voice dropped low and clear. "Sometimes the people with their hands in the dirt are the only ones keeping the foundation from collapsing." Camden didn't reply. But his eyes, sharp calculated, made one thing clear: this wasn't over. Later that afternoon, Noah received a text message from an unknown number. "Roof. 2:30 a.m. 1 last time." The moment he read it, his breath caught. For a heartbeat, the building disappeared, and all that remained was a single line of text on a dusty screen. She wasn't gone. Not yet. The air was crisp at 2:30 a.m. when Noah stepped onto the rooftop. The city stretched endlessly around him, quiet, glowing unknowingly witness to something small and immense. She was there, leaning against the railing in a worn sweater, her hair swept back by the wind. She didn't turn when he arrived, just spoke softly into the night. "I almost didn't text you." Noah stepped closer. "Why did you? Because I owed you more than silence." She turned to face him, her eyes rimmed red, but not from tears. From exhaustion. From relief. "I was terrified," she said, "of what they'd say, of who I'd become, of what I'd lose." Noah nodded. "And now I'm still terrified," she admitted. "But I'm not pretending anymore, and I'm done letting men in suits tell me who I'm allowed to be." They stood in silence, the breeze tugging at their sleeves. She looked up at the stars, then distant, bright, steady. Eli used to say the stars were upside-down snow, falling up instead of down. Noah chuckled, his eyes misting. Sounds like Ella and him would have gotten along just fine. Evelyn's smile faltered into something raw. "I don't know what's next. I don't know if I'll stay in this city. I just know I don't want to keep running. You don't have to." She met his gaze. "What if I'm not ready for a new life?" "You don't need a new one," he said gently. "Just one where you can breathe." She reached for his hand, and for the first time in what felt like years, Evelyn Langford exhaled without apology. "It's warm," she whispered, repeating the words she'd once said in a basement. "When you're here." Noah smiled. "Then stay a while." And under the vast, quiet sky where grief and healing touched hands, they did. By morning, the city felt slower. The air crisp with a fading chill, the kind that hinted at spring but still clung to winter's breath. Noah stood at the edge of the rooftop, the rising sun casting golden light across the skyline. The night before still clung to him like the scent of tea and wind, Evelyn's hand in his, her voice still echoing somewhere inside him. He'd walked her down from the rooftop just before 4 a.m. They hadn't said goodbye. Not officially. She told him she needed to clear out her office, finish things clean. He hadn't asked if she'd stay in the city. He hadn't asked if they'd see each other again. Somehow, he knew better than to turn a moment into a contract. Some things had to stay open-ended to remain real. That morning, Ella sat at the kitchen table building a tiny house from popsicle sticks and glue. "Is she okay now?" she asked without looking up. Noah poured her orange juice. "I think she's learning how to be." Ella squinted. "I don't get it." He smiled. "Me neither. But sometimes being okay isn't one big thing, it's a lot of little things starting to fit together." She placed a tiny red roof atop her house. "This one has a porch swing." For her. Noah swallowed against the ache in his throat. She'd love that. Later that week, Noah returned to work on the top floors for the first time since Evelyn had stepped down. The atmosphere was sterile, almost aggressively normal. The new interim CEO was a man with a handshake, like a cold handshake, firm, rehearsed, forgettable. Camden still prowled the halls, but his gaze had lost its edge. Rumor had it the board had softened his influence after Evelyn's exit, afraid of lawsuits, or maybe just afraid of exposure. Noah didn't care. Power games never held his attention. What did matter was the unexpected envelope left in his locker on Thursday afternoon. No name. Just a soft, ivory envelope sealed with a wax mark, subtle, precise. Inside a note in Evelyn's handwriting. "I'm heading out of town. A few weeks, maybe more. But I left something behind for you. Rooftop, 6 p.m. E." He stared at the note for a long moment. She was leaving again, but she wasn't hiding this time. At 5:59 p.m., Noah stepped onto the rooftop, bathed in the golden hue of sunset. The sky stretched wide and open above the city, a canvas painted with lavender and flame. There, near the far edge, was a small wooden bench. Newly placed, simple, weathered just enough to blend with the rooftop's character. On the seat sat a brown paper box. Inside, a worn cassette recorder, a fresh pack of blank tapes, and a folded note on lined stationery. For Ella. So she can record her stories. So she can remember what matters. And so she always has a place to speak into the silence. Noah sat down heavily. She hadn't just left a gift. She'd left trust. A message that the quiet they'd built together could carry forward even if she wasn't here to speak into it. He looked up at the horizon where the sun kissed the edges of the city's tallest towers. Then he pulled out his phone and hit record on a new voice memo. "Hey, sweetheart, this is Dad, and this is where the sky opens up." That evening, he and Ella sat on the apartment floor surrounded by markers, crayons, and the new recorder. "Can I say anything?" she asked. "Anything you want." She pressed the button, her voice soft but certain. "Today I built a house for a lady who forgot how to smile." And then my dad reminded her. She clicked it off and grinned. "Your turn." He laughed. That's tough to follow. But he leaned in and whispered, "I saw the stars from the roof, and they reminded me of two things: my daughter's courage and a woman who taught me how to stop surviving and start living." Ella beamed, then carefully clicked save on the recorder. 2 days later, as Noah walked to the back exit of the building after his shift, he found something tucked behind the maintenance cart. A new envelope. One photo. It was a picture of Evelyn and Eli taken years ago, clearly candid. They stood beneath a tree with roots spreading behind them like veins. Eli was mid-laugh and Evelyn's head was tilted back, eyes closed, the kind of laughter that made the world pause. On the back, scrawled in ink, "Thank you for reminding me that joy isn't something you chase. It's something you return to." E. He closed his eyes. She was still here in all the ways that mattered. That night, as the wind whispered through cracked windows and Ella snored gently on the couch, Noah climbed back to the rooftop. He didn't bring tea, or tools, or expectations. He brought himself. The bench waited. The stars shimmered overhead. He sat, pulled out the recorder, and clicked it on. "This is where you came back to me," he said. "Not as someone broken, but as someone brave." He paused, smiled, then added quietly, "I'll keep the light on." And beneath a sky wide enough to hold every loss and every beginning, Noah sat still. And waited. Not for rescue, not for answers, but for the next quiet miracle. Because somehow he knew it was coming. Noah stood just outside the basement door again. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks since Evelyn had left the city. 2 weeks since the rooftop note, the recorder, and the bench. In her absence, the building had felt colder, not just in temperature, but in energy. People moved, faster, smiled less. Camden kept to himself. The board rotated through dull, interchangeable faces. But tonight, the basement was different. It had been quietly reopened for staff breaks, nothing official, just a quiet order from above. Rumor had it Evelyn had filed a final motion in her last week to renovate the old sublevel into a resting space for overnight workers. The request had passed barely and with little fanfare. No one had noticed that one of the first changes she made in her departure was for the invisible people. People like Noah. He stepped in blinking against the soft lighting now newly installed in the corner. The old industrial bulbs were replaced with soft amber sconces. A small couch, second-hand but clean, sat where exposed wiring had once been. And there, against the far wall, a plaque. The Eli Room, a place to remember, a place to rest, a place to breathe. Noah's chest tightened. He ran his fingers across the lettering. Simple, humble, but sacred. There was a folded blanket on the couch, a fresh thermos of tea, and something else. A note neatly tucked under the lid. He opened it. "Noah, I'm back in the city, just for a few days. If you still believe in second chances, I'll be waiting. Tonight. Same place, same time." E. He didn't hesitate. He left his toolbox behind, bolted up the stairwell, and exited through the rear freight corridor. The city was unusually quiet. A light mist had begun to fall soft as breath on glass. By the time he reached the rooftop, she was already there. This time, she wasn't standing. She was sitting on the bench, their bench knees pulled up slightly, hair pulled back into a casual twist. The wind teased loose strands around her face. She didn't look up until he was only a few feet away. Then she stood. Neither of them spoke. Noah crossed the last few steps, and without ceremony, without preamble, Evelyn stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a romantic hug. Not at first. It was something deeper, something older, the kind of embrace that says, "You survived, and so did I." Her body trembled against his, but her hands were firm, steady. She pulled back just slightly, her forehead still resting against his chest. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I was always coming," he said softly. "I just didn't know when you'd be ready." She looked up then, and the expression in her eyes was different, clearer. Not clouded by fear or loss, but focused, vulnerable in a way that was braver than strength. "I visited Eli's grave last week," she said. "First time in over a year. I took the tape recorder." Noah said nothing. He knew better than to fill silence that wasn't asking to be fixed. "I told him about you, about Ella, about the basement," she added. "And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving him behind." "You're not," Noah said. Evelyn smiled, a real one this time. "I think he would have liked you. I hope he would have liked me with Ella's waffles and bad dad jokes." She laughed, and it cracked something open. Her laugh, light unfiltered, echoed across the rooftop. A sound that hadn't lived in her lungs for too long. "I didn't come back to reclaim the company," she said. I came back because I didn't want my story to end with a resignation email and a quiet exit. Noah looked at her. Then, how do you want it to end? She looked out over the city. I don't know yet, but I know I want to write it myself, not let grief write it for me. A pause, then softly, and maybe, I want to write some of it with you. His heart beat faster, but he kept his voice calm. You don't have to decide tonight. I'm not deciding. I'm just choosing to stay long enough to find out. Later that night, they walked back down to the basement together. Noah unlocked the door with the master key, and Evelyn smiled when she saw the renovations. She walked slowly to the plaque, ran her fingers across her son's name. Thank you for keeping him alive here. Noah sat on the couch and poured her a cup of tea. Thank you for making it real. They sat in easy silence for a while, sipping tea, watching the light bounce off the polished concrete. Evelyn pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket. I brought something, she said, for the wall. She handed it to Noah. It was a child's crayon drawing, a tree with deep roots, a swing, and 2 children underneath it, one with curly hair, one with pigtails. Between them, a son. Noah swallowed. Ella's Evelyn nodded. She left it in my mailbox, with a sticky note that said, he can come play any time. Noah's throat burned. He stood, found an old piece of tack from the drawer, and carefully placed the drawing beside the plaque. 1 for Eli, 1 for Ella, and 1 for the people who remembered what mattered most. That night, as they turned off the lights and closed the basement door behind them, there was no goodbye. There didn't need to be, because now they both understood something neither had been able to say before. Home wasn't always a place. Sometimes it was a person who stayed when the world tried to walk away. And this time, neither of them walked. The sun broke through the basement window for the first time in years. It was a narrow beam, barely wider than a child's finger filtered through dust and time, but it was real. Noah stood in its path as it spilled across the concrete floor, warming the air in a place once defined by chill. He smiled. A week had passed since Evelyn returned. In that time, she hadn't reclaimed her office or her former title. Instead, she'd moved quietly, intentionally, spending mornings with Ella, afternoons at a local community center she was quietly funding to launch a reading program in Eli's name. No fanfare, no press, just quiet healing. And each night she and Noah found themselves back in the basement. They didn't talk about the future, not in terms of big plans or labels. They talked about Ella's drawings, about tea, about wiring and laughter, and how grief made you braver if you didn't let it drown you. Tonight, Noah was finishing the last few installations in the new break area. The transformation was almost complete: smooth benches, fresh paint, soft lights on a dimmer switch. A bookshelf donated by Evelyn, already filling with books, most of them gently used, some with inscriptions that made Noah's throat catch. The plaque remained the heart of the room, the Eli room, a place to remember, a place to rest, a place to breathe. Evelyn stepped through the doorway carrying a small paper bag and a smile that looked lighter than any he'd seen on her before. Thought you might want a break, she said, handing him the bag. Inside, 2 homemade muffins, still warm. Don't tell me you bake now. Noah teased, unwrapping one. I follow instructions really well. That's my secret CEO skill. He laughed. You should put that on your resume. Can fix companies' lives and banana bread. She sat beside him on the low bench. I've been thinking, she said. Uh-oh, she elbowed him gently. About the people who never got to come down here. Noah tilted his head. I mean the ones who worked late shifts, the ones who never had a quiet place to rest or cry or just breathe. Before this room existed. Noah nodded slowly. They made do, but they shouldn't have had to, she said, eyes focused on the floor. It shouldn't take losing everything to realize what people really need. He reached over and took her hand. You're building something better now. She looked up. With you. He squeezed her fingers. That's the only way I'd do it." Just then, the door creaked and a soft voice called from the hallway. "Daddy." It was Ella, wearing her mismatched socks and holding a folded blanket under one arm. Noah stood. "Hey, Bug, I thought you were with Miss Marlene." "I was, but I wanted to come see the Eli room." She glanced at Evelyn shyly. "Is that okay?" Evelyn knelt down. "Of course. I'm so glad you're here." Ella tiptoed in wide-eyed. "It looks peaceful." "It's meant to," Noah said. "This room's for everyone who needs a little peace." Ella placed her blanket on the bench beside the bookshelf. "This is for people who forget to rest. Sometimes you have to be reminded." Evelyn blinked back tears. "You're very wise, Ella." The girl shrugged. "Daddy says that's because I'm 6 3/4. They all laughed, and for a moment the air held something more than peace, it held possibility. Later that evening, after Ella had gone home with the neighbor for a sleepover, Evelyn and Noah lingered in the basement a little longer. The light from the new sconces cast soft halos on the walls, and the scent of peppermint tea drifted between them. "I met with the community board this morning," Evelyn said. Noah looked over curious. "I'm funding 3 more rest spaces like this one. One in the Children's Hospital, one in the fire station near 5th Street, and one in the high school I used to attend." He whistled. "You're quietly taking over the world." "No," she said softly. "I'm quietly giving pieces of it back." She stood, then walked to the plaque again and rested her fingers on the name. "For so long I was afraid that if I let go of my position I'd lose him, that Eli's memory was tied to the version of me that never broke." Noah moved beside her. "But that version of you never got to breathe." She nodded. "Now I can. And so can he." Then, with a soft motion, she unfolded a slip of paper from her pocket. It was another drawing, this time one she had made. A tree, with roots, a sun behind it, and 3 figures beneath the branches, one small one tall and one slightly hunched with a toolbox. "I thought maybe this should go up here too," she said. Noah took the drawing. His eyes lingered on the caption beneath it, scribbled in ink, "The ones who stay when the lights go out." As they pinned the drawing to the wall, the lights flickered just once. Noah reached for his belt instinctively, but Evelyn stopped him with a smile. "It's okay," she whispered. "Sometimes even the light needs a moment to find its rhythm." And in that moment, Noah realized something. They weren't fixing a room. They were rebuilding something bigger, something invisible but real. A home, a legacy, a life that had room for grief and joy, for endings and beginnings, for remembering what was lost and making space for what could still be found. Outside the hallway, light stretched long across the floor, and for the first time in years it didn't look like a way out. It looked like a path forward. A year later, the plaque gleamed a little brighter. It wasn't just the new coat of polish or the way the maintenance crew had repainted the walls in warm tones. It was something else, something lived in, loved. The Eli room had become more than a renovated break space. It had become a quiet legend in the building, a place where people went not just to rest, but to reconnect. With their breath, with their stories, with themselves. A small sign had been added near the door in Ella's handwriting, laminated by Evelyn herself. "You are not alone. Please sit. Please breathe. Please stay as long as you need." Ella, age 7. That morning, a group of new interns passed the door and paused, curious. One of them asked, "Who was Eli?" Another replied, "A boy who taught a woman how to come back to life." Noah overheard them as he passed with his toolbox. He smiled but didn't interrupt. Some stories were better whispered, better carried by those who'd never met the people in them but still felt their echo. He stepped inside. Evelyn was already there, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea in one hand and a small spiral notebook in the other. Her hair was a little longer now, streaked with silver she no longer bothered to hide. She looked up and smiled in that soft, unhurried way that still made his chest tighten. "You're late," she teased. He checked his watch. "By 4 minutes. I could have started without you, but you didn't." They shared a look full of all the things that no longer needed to be said. Evelyn closed the notebook and set it aside. "Ella told me this morning that she wants to write a book one day." Noah grinned. "I'm not surprised. She's got more insight than most adults I know. She said she wants it to be called The Girl Who Painted the Sky, and that the first chapter will be about a woman who forgot how to dream." Noah's smile faded into something gentler. "She sees everything. She really does." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in a bed of velvet, was the old cassette recorder. It had been cleaned and repaired, but the buttons were worn with use. She placed it on the table in front of them. "It still works," she said. "I tested it last night." Noah reached out and pressed play. A child's voice filled the room. 1, 2, 3. It was Eli, clearer than Noah remembered, fuller, like time hadn't faded him, only distilled him into something eternal. Evelyn closed her eyes. When the tape ended, she didn't cry. She just took a deep breath, held it, and let it go. "The sound used to undo me," she whispered. "But now, it feels like a beginning." Noah reached over and took her hand. "It is." She turned to him, eyes soft. "I was thinking, maybe we could start a small program, donate recorders to families and hospitals. Let kids record their voices, their laughter, even their dreams. Something parents can hold on to." He nodded instantly. "We'll call it the Basement Light Fund." She smiled, touched. "I like that." They both looked up at the small ceiling lamp overhead, the very same one that had once flickered unpredictably. Now it glowed steady, soft and golden. "Funny," she said. "I used to think light came from power, from achievement. Now I know it comes from presence." Noah chuckled. "Says the woman who rebuilt an entire company just by learning how to sit still." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We rebuilt it." Outside, light poured in from the high basement window. The seasons had shifted again, spring pushing through the gray of winter. Somewhere above the city moved fast as always, but here below ground time moved gently. A knock echoed at the door. Ella peeked in her hair in pigtails and a sketchpad under her arm. "Can I come in?" Evelyn smiled and opened her arms. "Always." The girl skipped in and dropped onto the floor, flipping open her pad. "I'm making a new picture. Want to help?" They knelt beside her. On the page, a tree was already taking shape. Beneath it, 3 figures held hands, but this time a 4th one stood nearby, arms wide, waiting. "Who's that?" Noah asked, pointing. Ella grinned. "That's anyone who hasn't found this place yet." They stayed there, heads close, adding to the picture, no rush, no words. Just crayons moving across paper, love across silence. When they finished, Ella held it up. A family under a tree, a sun overhead, a small plaque at the base of the trunk that read, "We are still here." And they were, still healing, still remembering, still showing up, still here. And in that warm, quiet basement beneath a city that rarely slowed down, the light, gentle, unwavering, stayed on. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share a little about yourself. We read every message, and it truly means the world to us. Single Dad was fixing lobby lights at 2 a.m. Then a woman in a robe whispered, "You're so handsome." The lobby lights had been flickering for 3 days straight, and it was finally driving Gabe Carter crazy. He stood alone on the creaky stepladder, squinting at the old fixture while the storm outside howled like a living thing. Snow lashed against the wide lobby windows of the Pine Haven Mountain Resort, a luxury retreat nestled in the Colorado Highlands. Most guests were asleep by now, at least the ones who could sleep. Gabe tightened a bolt with his gloved fingers and sighed. He'd just finished a 10-hour shift clearing snow and salting walkways. But the lights were out again, and when you were the only maintenance man on duty at 2 a.m., there was no passing the buck. His back ached, his boots were still damp, and he hadn't had more than 5 hours of sleep in 2 days. But Gabe wasn't one to complain. He had bigger things on his mind, like whether Eli's new medication would hold through the next cold snap, or if he could stretch the week's grocery budget another day. He reached into his toolbox, grabbed a fresh fuse, and muttered, "Let's try this again." Just then, he heard it soft footsteps against marble. He paused. No one should have been up. Housekeeping ended their shift at midnight. Reception was unmanned at this hour, and security had checked in 15 minutes ago. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. Then stopped. Gabe slowly turned his head toward the hallway. And there she was. A woman stood near the base of the grand staircase, framed by the soft glow of a wall sconce. Her robe was silk ivory and fell just past her knees. Barefoot, her long, dark hair was pulled back loosely like she'd stepped out of sleep or a dream. Her eyes locked on his, unreadable at first. Then something flickered in them. Recognition. Desperation. "You're really handsome," she said. Gabe blinked, nearly dropping the fuse. The silence after her words was thick enough to choke on. He stepped off the ladder, carefully placing both feet on the ground before answering. "Ma'am, I think you might be—" "I'm not drunk," she said quickly, her voice calm but tense, like someone trying very hard not to break. "I know what time it is, and I know what I'm doing." He set his tools down, slowly, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. Years of being a single father had taught him how to read situations fast, especially when someone was on the verge of unraveling. "All right," he said gently. "Then maybe you'd like to sit down. The fire's still warm." She looked at the stone hearth across the room but didn't move. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. "Yes." "One." She nodded to herself as if that confirmed something. "Then maybe you'll understand why I'm about to do something insane." Gabe gave her a careful, patient look. "Try me." She stepped closer, just enough for him to see the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." Gabe stared at her, waiting for a punchline. It didn't come. "Look," she said, folding her arms tightly across her chest as if to hold herself together. "You probably think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But I'm supposed to fly to New York in the morning and announce my engagement to a man I don't love in front of my entire family and every shareholder in our company. I don't want to marry him. I never did." Gabe didn't move. He studied her. Not just her appearance, but her tone, her posture. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dare. It was a last-ditch act of defiance one whispered in the middle of the night to a stranger in work boots. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because you look like someone who won't lie just to impress me. And because you were the only man working in this entire resort at 2 a.m. fixing a broken light without asking for thanks. That says something. That I need the paycheck. That you have pride in what you do. And maybe you know what it's like to feel trapped." He didn't answer. She stepped even closer now, her voice lower. "I'll pay you. Generously. Just pretend to be my fiancé for a few days. Enough to convince my father and the board that I've made my own choice. Then you can go back to your life. Clean break." Gabe looked down, processing. He wasn't some wandering grifter looking to play games. He had responsibilities. Eli. His job. His quiet, hidden life. But the desperation in her voice wasn't fake, and neither was the fear behind her eyes. He exhaled slowly. "You don't even know my name." She straightened her posture, extending a hand with crisp boardroom poise. "Clarice Monroe, acting CEO of Monroe Holdings." "And you are Gabe," raised an eyebrow, shaking her hand with a firm grip. "Gabe Carter, maintenance guy, snow shoveler, and apparently fiancé for hire." A half smile broke across her lips, almost surprised she could still manage one. "Then I guess this is where our engagement begins." Somewhere down the hall a clock chimed softly. It was 2:11 a.m., and everything had just changed. Clarice sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the resort's reading lounge, her robe now covered by a borrowed gray cardigan Gabe had handed her without a word. The fire behind her crackled quietly, the flames softening the edges of her tension. She clutched a porcelain mug of peppermint tea, though she hadn't taken a single sip. Gabe leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, his blue maintenance jacket still zipped to the collar. His toolbox sat beside the hearth, forgotten for now. He had questions too many, but none he could ask without breaking whatever fragile state held her together. "This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go," Clarice said, her voice thinner than before. "I was going to take a walk, clear my head. I didn't expect to find you." Gabe arched an eyebrow. "You sound disappointed." "No," she said quickly, almost defensively. "Not disappointed, just surprised. You didn't ask questions." "Most people do." He shrugged. "You didn't look like someone who wanted to be interrogated." That drew the smallest smile from her. "You're right. I didn't." Gabe took a slow breath, then stepped closer. "Look, Clarice Miss Monroe, whatever this is, I'm not the guy for it. I'm just trying to keep my son healthy and a roof over our heads." Her eyes met his sharply at the mention of his son. "You said his name was Eli, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, 10 years old. Asthma. Smart enough to know when I'm lying and kind enough to pretend he believes me anyway." Something in Clarice's face cracked. Her gaze dropped to her lap. "That's the thing about kids, isn't it? They see straight through us." Gabe softened. "What happened, Clarice? What brought you out here in the middle of a storm, hiding from a life most people would trade everything for?" She looked up. "Control. That's what it's all about. My father's empire runs on it. Controlled assets, controlled narratives, controlled people, including me." She stood and walked slowly toward the window, her figure silhouetted against the falling snow. "I was a straight-A student. Got my MBA by 23. Took over regional strategy by 25. I've never missed a quarterly goal. But none of that matters to my father unless I also marry Henry Fields, the son of his oldest investor." Gabe stayed quiet. There was no judgment in his expression, just calm listening. Clarice continued. "They planned the whole thing, even the proposal. I was just a guest at my own life." A long silence followed. "And now you want me to be your ticket out?" Gabe asked quietly. Clarice turned. "Not out. Just a detour. Long enough for me to make my own decisions, not ones inherited from boardroom deals." He studied her for a long moment. "You're asking a stranger to stand beside you in front of people who can smell weakness from across a conference table." She straightened, her jaw tightening. "I don't think you're weak. That's not the point." She stepped closer. "I saw the way you spoke to me. The way you didn't rush, didn't posture. That's rare where I come from." Gabe hesitated. "This isn't just about me. If I go with you, I'll be gone for days. I'd have to leave Eli with my neighbor Annie. She's reliable, but he's had 2 attacks this month already." Clarice didn't hesitate. "I'll pay for his medication. For private care while you're gone. I'll make sure he's safe. You have my word." He let out a slow breath. Her offer was tempting, too tempting. And dangerous. His gut twisted with the weight of it. But then he remembered Eli's last ER visit, the fear in his son's eyes as the oxygen mask came down, the rising cost of prescriptions, the maintenance bills he hadn't opened yet. "You'd do that?" he asked. "Even if I say no later?" "Yes." That was the moment he knew she wasn't bluffing. There was no agenda in her voice, just exhaustion and a kind of battered honesty he respected. "I have conditions," he said. She blinked. "Name them." "1, no lying to Eli. If he asks, I tell him the truth. 2, you don't make me wear a tux unless it's absolutely necessary." Clarice smiled, a real one this time. "Deal. And 3." He paused, staring at her intently. "If this gets messy, and it will, you don't let me become your shield. I won't be someone you use to hurt your father." She met his gaze evenly. "I don't want to hurt him. I just want him to see me." Something about the way she said it settled the decision in his gut. Gabe exhaled through his nose. "All right then, Miss Monroe. Let's ruin a few expectations together." Clarice extended her hand again, this time firmer, more certain. "Let's." They shook. From the hallway, a digital clock blinked 3:01 a.m. in red. Outside, the storm began to ease, and inside, two strangers sealed a pact that would upend both their lives, one born not of ambition or romance, but of something rarer, mutual recognition in a world that rarely noticed people like them. The first thing Gabe noticed when they landed in New York wasn't the icy wind slicing between the glass towers, it was the way Clarice Monroe walked. She moved like a woman carrying a sword no one else could see. Every step down the jetway, every nod to passing assistants, every flick of her gaze was purposeful, controlled, regal, and completely unlike the woman who had whispered desperation through chattering teeth just 48 hours earlier. Gabe kept close his boots still dusted with the Colorado snow he hadn't quite brushed off. He'd worn his best clothes jeans without holes and a gray blazer Clarice had bought him for optics, but he still felt like someone walking into the wrong room at the wrong time. Their black town car glided through midtown traffic, cutting past honking cabs and LED billboards flashing with stock tickers and perfume ads. Gabe sat stiffly beside her, watching her eyes scan through documents on a sleek tablet. "Where are we going now?" he asked, trying not to sound like a hostage. Clarice didn't look up. "First, the penthouse. You'll meet Rosalind, my executive assistant. She'll brief you on the cover story. Then we'll change and go to the gallery opening. My father will be there. Henry, too." Gabe frowned. "We're doing all that today." She finally turned toward him. "The faster we go public, the harder it is for them to unravel." There was a pause. "And you'll need to act like you're used to this." This, Gabe said, glancing around the car's interior, feels a bit like pretending to breathe on Mars. Clarice smirked. "Then, hold your breath. You'll be fine." The penthouse was everything Gabe expected and nothing he'd ever imagined, living in polished floors, glass walls, art so abstract he wasn't sure which way was up. Eli would have called it a spaceship full of really nervous furniture. Rosalind, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, approached Gabe with a nod of acknowledgement, then handed him a sleek folder. "Your bio," she said curtly. "You've been in Clarissa's life for 6 months. You met in a charity function in Aspen. You share values, not status. You're private, steady protective. She finds your authenticity refreshing. You adore her. You want to marry her." Gabe raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's a lot of feeling for 6 months." Rosalind didn't blink. "That's Manhattan." Clarice disappeared into another room to change, leaving Gabe with a suit bag, a tie he didn't know how to tie, and 23 minutes to become the man she needed. By the time they stepped out of the car at the gallery, Gabe was transformed, or at least camouflaged. The space was flooded with people in tailored suits and glittering dresses, each holding champagne flutes and expressions of curated boredom. A modern jazz quartet hummed quietly in the corner. Spotlights reflected off glass and brushed metal casting soft glows on the guests' faces. Clarice slid her arm through his, pulling him close. Her perfume was subtle lavender and something woodsy. "You ready?" she murmured. "No," Gabe said honestly. She smiled. "Good. That means you won't overplay it." They moved through the crowd like a current. People turned curious. Whispers followed. Then came the flash. And another. A journalist called her name. "Clarice, over here, is that your fiancé?" She turned without missing a beat, pressing Gabe's hand against her waist like they'd done it 1,000 times. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and clear. "This is Gabe Carter. We're engaged." The room rippled. Some smiles turned tight. Others raised glasses in polite confusion. Then a voice cut through like a knife. "Well, isn't this unexpected?" Clarice tensed. Gabe turned. Henry Fields. Slick, tall, and dressed in navy wool. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I thought you were still considering our father's merger," Henry said. "Now you're announcing engagements." Clarice didn't flinch. Some deals fall through, others turn out to be better investments. Henry glanced at Gabe. "And this is the upgrade." Gabe smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes either. "I'm just the man who answers when she stops pretending." Clarice blinked just once, but it was enough. The heat in her cheeks wasn't embarrassment. It was something else, something she hadn't expected from a stranger in work boots. Henry studied Gabe a moment longer, then leaned in toward Clarice. "This won't last," he whispered. "Your father will never allow it." Clarice answered in a whisper of her own. "Then he's about to find out how much I've grown." Henry walked off. The crowd slowly returned to its usual buzz. Clarice and Gabe stood together under the lights, their connection half imagined, but now dangerously close to real. Gabe leaned close. "You all right?" She took a slow breath, eyes still on Henry's back. "I wasn't until you said that." He tilted his head. "Which part?" "The part about me not pretending. I haven't heard anyone talk to me like that in years. Not like I'm some asset to manage." Her eyes met his vulnerable again. "Thanks, Gabe, for showing up tonight." He gave a quiet nod. "Just promise me you'll tell me when it stops being pretend." Her smile was faint. "I think I'll know when it does." The cameras kept flashing. The city kept spinning. But something had shifted between them, something subtle and fragile and real beneath all the practiced smiles and polished lies. And for the first time in a very long time, Clarice Monroe didn't feel like she was acting. Clarice woke the next morning in her penthouse bedroom with the strange sense that her world had shifted, and not in the way she expected. Outside the enormous windows, the city pulsed to life beneath a slate-gray sky horns echoing like a hymn to motion. But inside, it was oddly quiet. She sat up, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Gabe had slept in the guest room, he'd insisted, and though it was all for show, a part of her had felt something tighten when she watched him walk away down the hallway last night. Not attraction. Not yet. Just a recognition of something. Grounded. Authenticity. She wasn't used to it. Certainly not from men in her world. In the kitchen, she found him already dressed jeans, a clean Henley sleeves, pushed up barefoot, flipping pancakes like it was second nature. Eli would have adored him. "Morning," Gabe said casually, not looking up from the skillet. She blinked. "You cook," he shrugged. "I parent. Cooking comes with the job." She walked to the counter, watching him pour a fresh cup of coffee and slide it across to her without asking. It was exactly how she took it. No sugar splash of oat milk. "How'd you know?" she asked, surprised. Gabe smirked. "I have eyes. You used that milk 3 times yesterday and never touched the sugar jar." She smiled into her cup. Observant. Occupational hazard. Fixing things means you have to notice what's broken first. Clara studied him for a moment. There was something in his tone, not pride, but presence. Gabe had the kind of stillness that made other people settle without realizing it. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. He glanced over. "Miss what?" "The boardrooms. The strategy. Your old life." He paused before answering, then set the pan aside. "Not really. I miss being good at something that mattered, but not the world I had to live in to be there." Clarice tilted her head. "You were good." Gabe met her eyes. "I was very good." She let that settle for a beat. "So why walk away?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Because my wife got sick. And I realized no one in that world knew how to hold space for grief. They saw weakness as a liability. I didn't want to be part of a place where you have to hide your humanity to survive." Clarice felt something lurch in her chest. She lowered her cup. "I'm sorry." Gabe gave a half smile. "You don't have to be. I got Eli out of it. And a quieter life, it's enough." But the way he said enough told her it wasn't. "Not really." Later that afternoon, Clarice and Gabe entered the conference wing of Monroe Holdings. The building rose 50 stories above Fifth Avenue, a glass and steel tribute to power. Gabe didn't speak as they rode the elevator, but she saw him watching everything: entry badges, exit paths, digital security panels. He was scanning, calculating. Clarice leaned closer. "You're analyzing this like a battlefield." He gave her a wry glance. "In corporate strategy, it usually is." The elevator doors opened, revealing the executive floor. Waiting for them was her father, Douglas Monroe. Douglas had the air of a lion gone silver. Trim suit, polished shoes, eyes like granite. He was flanked by Henry Fields and 3 senior board members. "Clarice," he said evenly, "I didn't expect you back so soon." "I wanted to introduce someone," she said calmly. "This is Gabe Carter." Gabe extended a hand. "Pleasure, Mr. Monroe." Douglas looked him up and down with the precision of a man appraising market risk. "Your background," Gabe didn't flinch. "Small business consultant, former partner at Crane Bennett Strategy Group. I left 5 years ago. Currently working independently, mostly by choice." Henry laughed under his breath. "That's one way to say unemployed." Gabe turned to him. "Unemployed implies no work. I raise a 10-year-old, manage full maintenance operations at Pine Haven Resort, and apparently now serve as an emotional decoy for a corporate princess. I'd say that's 3 jobs in one." Silence fell. Clarice's breath hitched. Then, surprisingly, Douglas chuckled. Just once, but it echoed. "I like him," Douglas said. "He's got bite." Clarice blinked. Henry's face darkened but said nothing. After the meeting, as they waited for the elevator, Clarice turned to Gabe. "You didn't have to push back that hard." "Yes, I did," he replied simply. She hesitated. "Why?" "Because this world eats people alive. You need someone next to you who won't be devoured. I can't be your shield if I fold at the first sign of condescension." Clarice swallowed hard. "You're not just playing anymore, are you?" Gabe's expression softened. "I never was." "Not completely." That evening, back at the penthouse, Clarice poured herself a glass of wine and stared out over the city lights. For the first time in years, she wasn't dreading the next morning. Wasn't plotting the next move like a chess game she was destined to lose. She was thinking of pancakes, of 10-year-old boys and quiet bravery, of a man who fixed things not just with tools, but with words. And she wondered what it meant when the lines between pretend and real began to blur, and why the idea didn't scare her as much as it should have. The next few days unfolded like a beautifully rehearsed play. Clarice and Gabe moved through meetings, dinners, and curated appearances with synchronized precision. The press was enchanted. The grounded self-made fiancé was a narrative the tabloids couldn't resist, and Clarice's image surged in public favor. But behind closed doors, the performance grew increasingly complicated. Gabe wasn't supposed to fit into her world so seamlessly. He wasn't supposed to remember everyone's names in the boardroom, or quietly hand her a pen during a negotiation when she was fumbling with nerves. He wasn't supposed to speak up once, and then sit back and listen like he was studying her not to gain leverage but to understand her. He wasn't supposed to make her feel seen. And worst of all, he wasn't supposed to make her feel safe. One night after a charity event hosted at the Met, Clarice and Gabe returned to the penthouse later than usual. The car ride had been quiet, but not in a tense way. More like 2 people who had grown used to silence not being awkward. She changed into a soft gray sweater and poured herself a cup of tea, while Gabe disappeared into the guest room. But when she walked past Eli's room, the one Gabe had temporarily set up with pictures and books she'd never noticed before, she paused. The lights were off, but the door was cracked. Inside, Gabe was sitting on the edge of the bed, softly reading a story out loud. Clarice leaned against the doorframe, her heart catching in her throat. And the little engine said, "I think I can. I think I can." And he pulled the others up the hill. Gabe read his voice calm and warm. Then he looked up, catching her watching. "Sorry," he said with a quiet smile. "I know he's not here, but it helps me feel close to him." Clarice walked in and sat on the floor beside the bed. "You do that every night?" Gabe nodded. "I used to read to him from the hospital when I was out of town. Now I just do it from wherever I am, even if he's not listening. It keeps me grounded." Clarice looked at the small collection of worn children's books on the nightstand. "Your son's lucky. I'm the lucky one." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said softly. Gabe nodded. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're okay?" He exhaled slowly. "All the time. But I made peace with the idea that I'm allowed to carry pain and still keep going. They're not mutually exclusive." Clarice swallowed. "I've never known how to do that. You've been taught to compartmentalize. Most people in your position have. But that kind of life, it costs you." She looked at him. "What did it cost you?" He hesitated. "My marriage. Not because I didn't love her, but because I was too busy trying to fix everything that was breaking around her. I stopped just being there." Clarice's throat tightened. "And now I try to show up for real, even when it's hard, even when I'm scared." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That sounds exhausting." Gabe smiled gently. "It is. But it's also the only thing that ever made me feel human again." Clarice looked away, blinking quickly. Something sharp and unspoken was shifting inside her chest. A kind of ache that had nothing to do with longing and everything to do with finally understanding what she'd been missing all these years. Connection. Not the performative kind. Not the kind bound by status or mutual benefit. But the raw, unpolished, deeply present kind. She stood brushing invisible dust from her jeans. "Gabe." He looked up. "When this is over, when the performance ends, I don't know if I'll be ready to let you go." The words hung in the air, terrifying in their honesty. Gabe stood slowly. There was a gentleness in his expression, but no pretense. "Clarice, we're walking a very thin line here. I know, this started out as a lie, but it's not all a lie anymore. Is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said very quietly, "I don't know what it is. I just know it's real." And then, just as naturally as a breath, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips lingered, not to seduce, but to stay to say, "I see you, even when you're not trying to be seen." Clarice's eyes closed for half a second, the warmth of the moment washing over her like sunlight breaking through clouded glass. But before she could speak again, a sharp chime cut through the room. Her phone. She walked over and picked it up, heart-pounding. The screen read, "Father, 3, missed calls." She swallowed and answered. Dad, Douglas Monroe's voice came through cold and sharp. "You need to turn on the news." Clarice turned toward the TV and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. A photo of Gabe shirtless working on a broken pipe outside the resort in Colorado. The headline beneath it screamed, "Clarice Monroe's Fiancé Fraud," or Fortune Hunter. Her breath caught. Gabe walked over slowly, watching the same screen. She turned to him, dread coiling in her stomach. "They found you." He nodded once. "And they're just getting started." The warmth of the moment shattered like glass beneath a high heel. And just like that, the beautiful lie they'd been living began to teeter on the edge of something dangerously real and publicly unraveling. The headlines didn't stop. By noon, every media outlet from Wall Street Journal to gossip blogs had picked up the story, Clarice Monroe's mystery fiancé, a single dad with a secret past. Photos of Gabe fixing pipes, shoveling snow, and even walking with a paper bag of groceries circulated with brutal speed. They framed him as a fraud, an opportunist. Some painted him as romanticized working-class charm. Others whispered gold digger. But the truth was far more complicated and far more human. Clarice stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, staring at the skyline as her phone buzzed relentlessly on her desk behind her. She hadn't spoken to Gabe all morning. He'd left early to clear his head, said he needed air. But she could still feel the ghost of his presence, the way his quiet steadiness had become part of the air she breathed. Douglas Monroe's voice echoed from her last conversation with him. You've jeopardized your entire position for a man you barely know. But she did know Gabe. She knew how he brewed coffee exactly 7 minutes after waking up, how he checked the air filters in her penthouse without asking, how he spoke to her like she was a person, not an asset. That kind of knowing didn't need years, it needed honesty, and Gabe had given her nothing but that. The door burst open without a knock. Rosalind entered, tablet in hand, lips pursed. I've contained the damage as best I can. PR is working on a statement. Your father wants you in the boardroom in 30. Clarice turned. What kind of statement? That this was all a misunderstanding. That you and Mr. Carter had a brief romance, but you've ended the engagement. Gracefully. Clarice's pulse throbbed in her neck. That's not true. Rosalind's expression didn't change. Truth stopped mattering the minute his photo hit the tabloids. Clarice crossed her arms. I won't lie, not for the board, not for my father. Then, you're going to lose your seat. The words landed like a slap. Not because they were unexpected, but because they no longer terrified her the way they once did. I appreciate your loyalty, Rosalind, she said, voice steady. But I didn't fight this hard to finally have a voice, only to use it repeating someone else's script. Rosalind looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a rare show of softness, she said, Be careful. The board isn't kind to women who bleed publicly. Clarice gave a half smile. Then maybe it's time they see what bleeding with dignity looks like. Meanwhile, Gabe was across the city walking the quiet pathways of Central Park. The snow had started to melt, leaving patches of wet earth and gravel exposed. He'd turned off his phone hours ago. Not because he was hiding, because he was trying to remember who he was before all this began. Before tuxedos and flashing cameras, before fake bios and corporate posturing, before he'd let himself believe even for a moment that he could belong in a world built on power games and polished masks. He sat on a bench near the frozen edge of a pond, rubbing his palms together. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. He wasn't ashamed of where he came from, but he hated how easily people dismissed him because of it. A voice startled him. You're not hard to find. He looked up. Clarice stood before him, wrapped in a long wool coat, her eyes soft but sharp. I figured you'd be somewhere real, she said. Somewhere quiet. Gabe exhaled, his voice low. They tore into everything, didn't they? Yes, she said. And I didn't stop them. Not fast enough. He shook his head. This isn't on you. I disagree. She sat beside him, close enough for their arms to nearly touch. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clarice turned to him. They want me to renounce you in front of the board, to say you were a mistake, a moment of weakness. Gabe didn't flinch. And are you going to? She paused. I don't know what this is between us yet, but I know it isn't a mistake, and I'm done pretending it is. He looked at her. Really looked. You'd give up everything for that. She smiled, small but fierce. I think I'm starting to understand what everything actually means. Gabe stared out over the pond, heart pounding. I can't promise I'll fit into your world, Clarice, he said. But I can promise I'll never let you become someone you're not just to survive it. She reached for his hand, then firmly, not delicately, like a decision. I don't need you to fit in, I just need you to stand with me. 30 minutes later, they entered the Monroe Holdings boardroom together. It was a room built to intimidate long mahogany table panoramic view of the skyline, 20 men and women in tailored suits, cold eyes. Douglas sat at the head, flanked by Henry Fields. Clarice stood at the opposite end, Gabe beside her. Her voice rang out clear, You all asked for an explanation. Here it is. I chose Gabe Carter. I chose honesty. I chose a life where I don't have to check my integrity at the door. The room shifted uncomfortably. Douglas narrowed his eyes. So you're willing to risk this company for what sentiment? Clarice lifted her chin. I'm not risking it. I'm reshaping it. If that means stepping down, so be it. But I won't lead with fear. Not anymore. She reached for Gabe's hand, and to her surprise he took it without hesitation. The silence that followed wasn't applause, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something rarer, respect, even if it came reluctantly. Clarice hadn't known silence could be this loud. The elevator descended from the Monroe Holdings boardroom, its walls of polished brass reflecting the expression on her face, calm, composed, until you looked into her eyes. She stood with her back straight, her fingers still wrapped around Gabe's, though his grip had softened, unsure. The confrontation had gone better than expected. No dramatic firing, no instant scandal, but the fallout would come. Clarice knew how these people operated. Their retaliation never screamed. It whispered behind closed doors in withheld funding, stalled projects, and carefully worded memos. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Gabe pulled his hand away gently. She looked at him, startled. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer immediately. They walked out through the marble lobby side by side, his pace slower than usual. "Gabe," she asked again. Outside, a cold wind cut between the buildings. Gabe finally stopped beside a planter box dusted with snow. "I need to go back to Colorado." Clarice blinked. "What?" "Just for a few days," he said. "I talked to Annie this morning. Eli's been having a rough week, 2 coughing fits, 1 hospital visit." Her chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to fix it. He's my son." "Clarice." She nodded slowly. "I understand." "Of course. But this feels like more than just a check-in." He looked at her. "Really?" Looked. "It is." She felt it then, like something slipping between her fingers, unspoken and irreversible. "This world," he said, motioning to the skyscrapers around them, "was never meant for me. I can borrow the suit, learn the lingo, shake the hands, but it's not who I am. And I can't afford to lose myself trying to keep up." "But you didn't lose yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "You grounded me. You walked into my chaos and didn't run. You're the most real thing that's happened to me in years." He reached for her hand again, not with passion, but with the weight of someone making peace. "That's why I need to step away," he said, "because I don't want what we have to get poisoned by the pressure around it. Not now, not when it's just starting to be something true." Clarice swallowed. "So that's it. You're leaving. I'm choosing to show up for my son. And maybe to figure out what it means to show up for you, but in a way that doesn't make either of us smaller." She closed her eyes briefly, battling tears. "I wish you didn't have to go." He smiled faintly. "So do I." That night, Clarice wandered her penthouse alone. No Gabe making tea in the kitchen. No quiet humming while he folded towels or adjusted the thermostat. The silence was unfamiliar and unbearable. She sat on the couch and opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The front page of nearly every business site featured her name. Some articles praised her bold stand for independence, while others questioned her emotional judgment and speculated about her future as CEO. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the hollow in her chest where Gabe's steadiness had been. She clicked open a browser and typed "flights to Colorado." Then she stopped. Not because she doubted her decision, but because this wasn't about chasing him. It was about becoming someone who wouldn't lose herself again just because someone else walked away. That was the real cost of love, not in losing control, but in choosing who you are when no one else is there to catch you. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, Gabe returned to a snow-covered world that felt both familiar and strange. Eli ran into his arms at the airport, clinging tightly. "Dad," the boy whispered, "I missed you every second." Gabe kissed his son's hair heart, swelling with something deeper than words. "Me too, bud. More than you know." Later, as they sat in their modest living room fireplace, crackling cartoons playing quietly in the background, Gabe realized how different everything looked now. The peeling wallpaper, the squeaky heater, the thrift store couch. None of it had changed. But he had. He was still a single dad. Still juggling bills, still watching over a boy with lungs too fragile for winter. but he wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way that mattered. Clarice's voice lived in his head like a melody he hadn't known he missed until it was gone. He thought about texting her. Then he didn't. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at his door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note in Clarice's elegant script. You once told me pain and motion aren't mutually exclusive. I'm learning that too. I've kept your mug in the cupboard, just in case you find your way back to it. Clarice taped to the bottom was a child's drawing, Eli's unmistakably with stick figures, Gabe Clarice, and a crooked heart between them. Gabe stared at it for a long time. He knew then that distance didn't diminish real things. It clarified them. On the 7th night, Gabe tucked Eli in, read him 2 chapters, and lingered at the bedroom door. Then he walked to the living room, picked up his phone, and dialed. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Hey," she said softly. Gabe's voice broke through. "I want to come back. But not just for you." Clarice was silent for a beat. "Then why for us?" he said. "For what we are when we're not pretending." She exhaled a shaky breath. "Then, come home." And for the first time, Gabe realized she didn't mean New York. She meant wherever he stood with her beside him. The day Gabe returned to New York, the city was wrapped in one of those soft, unexpected March thaws where the air hinted at spring, but the sidewalks still clung to the last bite of winter. He stepped off the train with nothing but a small overnight bag and a folded drawing from Eli tucked into the front pocket of his coat. Clarice was waiting for him on the edge of the platform, not in her usual heels and coat of armor, but in a simple navy sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, no makeup. There was no press, no performance. Just her. He smiled before he could stop himself. She walked toward him and stopped a few steps away. "Hey, hey," he said, voice low and a little breathless. "Did you come to save me?" she asked, half playful, half vulnerable. He shook his head. "No. I came to walk beside you. That's all I ever really wanted." Her eyes filled, and before she could say anything, he reached out and gently took her hand. They didn't need to fill the silence. They were the silence. And the peace inside it. That evening, they sat together in the penthouse, no scripts between them. Gabe stood at the kitchen counter stirring soup, sleeves rolled up, a towel tossed over his shoulder. Clarice leaned against the doorframe, watching him like someone witnessing something sacred. "I missed this," she said quietly. He glanced up. "You missed my soup?" "No," she said, smiling. "I missed you. You're being here. Like this." He set the spoon down and walked toward her. "You know, you could have had any man in this city. Any man in this country, really. And you chose a guy who can fix your sink but struggles to fit in at a cocktail party." Clarice took his hand and placed it over her heart. "I didn't need someone who fit in. I needed someone who fit me." Gabe didn't respond with words. He stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, holding her like she was the only thing that made sense in the world. It wasn't passionate or frenzied, it was certain. A certainty neither of them had felt in years. They stood there a long time, breathing together. Healing. The next day brought the fallout. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Clarice walked into the Monroe Holdings executive floor, Gabe at her side, not hidden behind her, but beside her, hand in hand. They weren't there to fight. They were there to claim something. Rosalind met them at the elevator, surprise flashing across her usually composed face. "They're all in the boardroom." Clarice nodded. "Good. So are we." Inside the room buzzed like a hive of restrained judgment. The board members glanced at each other, clearing throats, raising brows. Douglas Monroe sat at the head of the table, stone-faced. "Clarice," he said, folding his hands. "This isn't a social call. We have shareholders waiting for a resolution." Clarice placed a slim folder on the table. "This is a 5-year projection based on a strategy Gabe and I developed last night. We restructured 3 underperforming regions, divested from an inflated holding, and reallocated funds toward the sustainable housing initiative you keep postponing." The board members leaned in, suddenly attentive. Douglas blinked. "You did all that in one night," Gabe answered, calm and clear. "It's amazing what you can do when you're not trying to impress anyone. Just solve problems." Clarice met her father's eyes. "We're not here to ask for permission. We're here to offer leadership, the kind that doesn't compromise people for profit." Douglas said nothing. One of the older board members, a woman named Lillian, who'd been silently flipping through the document, spoke next. "This is good. Aggressive, but lean. And the returns are clean," Gabe said. "No shortcuts, just transparency and vision." The room shifted. It wasn't surrender, but it wasn't resistance either. Douglas looked at Clarice, and for the first time the sternness in his face softened. "You're not the same girl who sat at that table a year ago," he said. "No," Clarice replied. "I'm not, and I don't want to be." That night, after the boardroom dust had settled and the final email had been sent, Clarice and Gabe took a walk through Central Park. It was late, and the lamps cast golden puddles of light on the pavement. A breeze stirred her hair. He laced their fingers together, pulling her a little closer. "You didn't have to bring me back into that room," he said. "You could have stood on your own." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I could have, but I didn't want to." They stopped near the lake, the city lights shimmering in the rippling water. Clarice turned to him. "I spent most of my life believing I had to do everything alone. That love was a liability. That vulnerability was weakness. But then you showed up fixing a light bulb at 2 in the morning, like it was the most important job in the world." He smiled. "It kind of was." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I didn't just fall for you, Gabe. I learned from you. I became more myself because you didn't try to change me, you respected me. That was the miracle." Gabe's throat tightened. "And you saw through me when no one else even bothered to look." He took both her hands. "I know we're still building this, but I'm in. All the way, as long as you want me." Clarice looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I want you," she said. "For real. No more pretending." Then, under the city lights with no cameras, no scripts, no expectations, she kissed him. It was slow, deep, home. And somewhere between the past and the future, two people who were never supposed to fit finally did. The board's silence didn't last long. Within 24 hours of Clarice's presentation, the tide began to shift. Emails were exchanged, whispered meetings held. Some board members were cautiously impressed. Others saw her defiance as dangerous precedent. The shareholders were divided, and more than a few were asking uncomfortable questions about leadership stability. Still, Clarice walked through the storm with her chin high, Gabe never far from her side. But on the third morning, a letter arrived. She opened it at the kitchen island, fingers trembling only slightly. Gabe watched her from across the room, his coffee untouched. Notice of review temporary suspension of executive authority. Pending emergency vote. Her breath caught. They were calling a vote, a formal challenge to her leadership. She blinked slowly, then set the paper down. Gabe stood and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. "Clarice." She shook her head. "It's not unexpected, but it's still a punch." She managed a faint smile. "You'd think I'd be used to it by now." He reached for her hand. "You don't have to do this alone." "I'm not," she said softly, and in that moment it was clear she'd been alone for so long, she'd forgotten how to accept support. And now that it was here solid and unwavering, it changed everything. The day of the vote arrived like a storm front. Clarice stood before the board in the same room that had tried to bury her identity more than once. She wore navy sharp and understated. No jewelry, no polish, only purpose. Douglas Monroe sat at the head of the table, gaze unreadable. Beside him, Henry Fields looked almost smug. He'd been waiting for this. A full shareholder quorum had been called. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the tension was thick enough to broadcast on its own. Clarice cleared her throat and stepped forward. "No notes today," she began. I've given you all enough slides, spreadsheets, and forecasts to last a fiscal year." A ripple of chuckles, uneasy but real. She let the silence fall for a beat. "I'm not going to stand here and justify my relationship or my choices. You've already decided what you think about those. But I will remind you of something: leadership is not compliance. It's courage. It's seeing the people behind the profits. And for too long we've operated like those two things are separate." Her gaze swept the room. "I've brought you growth. I've brought vision. And yes, I've brought discomfort. Because disruption often feels like rebellion until it becomes the new foundation." Someone in the back nodded. She turned to her father. "Dad, you taught me to lead with clarity. You said profit will follow conviction. Well, I'm giving you mine. And if you don't want it, if this board decides I'm not fit to lead, then I will step down. Not because I failed, but because I refuse to become someone I don't recognize just to stay." Then quietly she added, "But if you believe in the company, I know we can become. Then let me build it." Without apology. A beat of silence followed. Then a low voice called the vote. One by one, hands raised. It was slow, deliberate, and breathtaking. In the end, it wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. She stayed. Clarice let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her eyes found Gabe through the glass wall waiting just outside. She didn't smile. Not yet. Not until the choice was hers again. That evening, she and Gabe walked the High Line as the sun dipped over the Hudson, bathing the city in gold. "I didn't know if they'd keep me," she said, voice light but quiet. "I did," Gabe replied. "You walked in there like someone who wasn't afraid of losing." She looked at him. "I was afraid. I still am. But I've spent so many years trying to be right, I forgot how it feels to be real." Gabe stopped and turned to face her. "Clarice, what you did today, what you've been doing since that night in the resort lobby, it's not just bold, it's honest, and people are starving for that kind of leadership." She stared at him, her throat tight with something deeper than victory. "You changed me." "No," he said softly. "You just finally had room to be who you already were." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small square box. He frowned. "What's that?" Clarice opened it. Inside was a ring, but not just any ring. A modest gold band, simple and elegant with a tiny engraving on the inside. The light was never broken. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, holding his gaze. "I don't know how we navigate two lives, two cities, a son, and a past that doesn't always feel distant." Gabe's eyes filled. "But I do know this: I don't want to lead a company or a life without you in it. And I'm not asking you to propose. I'm asking you to choose this with me. As partners, as equals." Gabe took the box gently from her hands. Closed it. Then leaned in and kissed her with all the quiet depth of a man who had learned the hard way that real love never shouts, it shows up. When he pulled back, he whispered, "You already know my answer." And the city, ever impatient, paused just long enough to witness it. Snow had returned to Pine Haven. The March wind had curled back into winter's breath, dusting the resort's pine-shaded roofs with a thin layer of white. Gabe stood outside the small tool shed near the rear maintenance entrance, holding a flashlight in one hand and a worn leather journal in the other. His name was still etched on the toolbox beside him. G. Carter, though someone else had likely used it since he left. He hadn't come back to reclaim anything. He came to make peace with the man he used to be. Clarice had insisted on joining him, but he'd asked for a day. Just one. Alone. To touch the world where he and Eli had built a life from quiet survival. Where grief had taken up residence in his bones, but where hope had slowly, stubbornly returned, one routine, one bedtime story, one repaired light at a time. He stepped into the old maintenance corridor and flipped the switch. Nothing. The lights once again were out. He laughed softly under his breath. Figures. Gabe grabbed a spare fuse, climbed the stepladder near the breaker box, and began the familiar ritual. Screwdriver. Check wiring. Replace. As he worked, memories flooded back of frigid night's tools freezing in his hands, of running to Eli's bedside in the middle of a shift, of moments where no one saw him but he showed up anyway. It hadn't been glamorous, but it had been real, and real was everything. By noon, he stepped back outside just as a black SUV pulled up along the snowy curb. The door opened and Clarice stepped out, her coat flaring in the wind like something from a dream. No makeup, no press, just her. She walked toward him with a smile that warmed even the bitter mountain air. "You fixed the lights?" she asked, glancing up at the softly glowing fixtures in the lodge windows. He nodded. "Still remember how?" She tilted her head. "You ever miss it?" He looked around then, back at her. Sometimes. Not the cold, not the hours, but the simplicity of it. You fix a thing and it stays fixed for a while. Clarice walked closer and slipped her arm through his. "Life's not like that, is it?" "No," he said, "but it's not broken either, just complicated." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out." Gabe smiled. "You say that like it's easy." "No, I say it like it's ours." That night, the entire town gathered for the winter community fundraiser at Pine Haven's event hall. Gabe had once fixed the stage lights for these events without anyone noticing. Now he stood in the crowd, a guest next to Clarice Monroe, who looked out of place only in title, not in heart. Eli held her hand like he'd done it 1,000 times. She bent down to whisper something in his ear, and the boy grinned, nodding toward the hot chocolate stand. She nodded back, watching him run off with 2 other kids from the lodge. Gabe turned to her. "You're good with him." "He's easy to love," she said softly. "So are you," he said, surprising her, and maybe himself. She didn't reply right away, just stared at him, eyes filled with something weightier than words. "I used to think the only way to lead was to stay untouchable," she whispered. "Strong. Alone." And now he asked. "Now I know that strength isn't in solitude. It's in choosing the right people to let in and letting them stay." The hall lights dimmed as someone tapped the mic on stage. It was Douglas Monroe. Clarice straightened in surprise. "He's here." Gabe followed her gaze. Douglas took the podium, clearing his throat before addressing the crowd. "My daughter asked me not to make a speech," he began. "So, naturally, I'm making one anyway." Laughter. He smiled briefly. "I spent my life building an empire believing that control and power were the cornerstones of leadership. But recently, I've watched someone I love lead with something I forgot existed: conviction without ego, compassion without apology." He looked directly at Clarice. "She reminded me that success isn't about how many people stand below you. It's about how many you lift beside you." The room was silent. Douglas continued. "So tonight, I want to thank the person who showed me that again. Not just my daughter, but the man who made her braver." Gabe blinked, stunned. Douglas stepped down from the stage and walked toward them. He stopped in front of Gabe and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for standing with her when I didn't know how." Gabe took the hand firm and steady. "I didn't stand for her. I just stood with her." Clarice watched them, eyes glistening. Later, under the stars outside the event hall, Clarice pulled Gabe aside. "This place," she said, breath curling in the night air. "It's where it all started, isn't it? The lobby lights. That ridiculous robe. My terrible timing." He smiled. "It was the best timing of my life." She laughed. "You always say the simplest things like they're profound, because sometimes they are." Clarice reached into her coat pocket again. Not a ring this time. "A key. To the place across from yours," she said. "I rented it. At least for a while." Gabe stared at her, surprised. "I want to learn this rhythm with you," she said. "Your world. Eli's world. Ours. I want to do the simple things, the hard things, the everyday things with you." He took the key gently, then pulled her into his arms. And for the first time, everything felt exactly as it should be. Not perfect, but whole. Lights fixed, hearts open, together. The wedding wasn't grand. There were no marble halls, no designer gowns, no long guest list curated by assistants and corporate partners. Instead, there was a lake, half frozen, half glittering beneath the April sun, bordered by pines that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was crisp, clean alive with the scent of melting snow and spring just beneath the surface. Clarice stood beneath an arch made of pine branches and white linen, her hair loosely braided down her back cheeks flushed with more than just the cold. She wore a simple ivory dress that moved like wind and felt like peace. Eli, beaming in his little gray suit, adjusted the boutonniere on Gabe's lapel and whispered, "You look like a superhero." Gabe smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's only because of the cape under the shirt." Eli giggled, then ran to his spot beside Clarice holding the small pillow that carried 2 silver rings. The guests were few. Rosalind holding a cup of cocoa and blinking back what she swore were just allergies. Douglas Monroe seated near the front, his pride silent but unmistakable. A few neighbors from Pinehaven, Clarice's old college roommate, a baker who had once let Eli taste cake samples just for fun. No press, no spectacle, just people who mattered. Just love. The officiant, a kind woman from town with a voice like warm tea, began the ceremony as Gabe and Clarice joined hands. Today, she said, we celebrate not only the bond between 2 people, but the choice they made to see each other not as perfect but as present, not as polished but as real. Love, at its core, is not built on performance. It's built on presence. And today, these 2 choose presence together. Clarice looked up at Gabe, her eyes bright. "I used to believe I had to do everything alone," she said softly. That independence meant isolation. That power meant silence. But then you came into my life carrying a wrench and a kind word, and you taught me the most beautiful truth I've ever known. Strength isn't about who you stand above. It's about who you stand with. Her voice wavered, but she held steady. You showed me how to be soft without breaking. You reminded me that love doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stay. I promise to choose you every ordinary day, to build something with you not because it's expected but because it's ours. Gabe swallowed hard, fingers gently tightening around hers. I was a man who fixed things, he said, voice low but clear. Pipes, lights, broken hinges. But when I met you, I realized something. I didn't need to fix you. I just needed to stand beside you while you rebuilt yourself. He took a breath, the wind catching in his chest. You gave Eli a second home before you ever gave me a promise. And that told me everything I needed to know. I don't just love you, I respect you. I see you. And I will spend the rest of my life showing up for you. The way you've shown up for me. Tears slipped silently down Clarice's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She wanted to remember how it felt to be seen so completely. The rings were exchanged simple, silver smooth. No diamonds, no fuss. Just symbols of something far more rare than glamour. Commitment. The real kind. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer erupted from the small crowd. Eli ran up and wrapped both arms around their waists, burying his face between them. "You're really married now?" he asked, eyes wide. Gabe knelt to his level. "Yeah, buddy, we really are." Eli turned to Clarice. "Does that mean you're my mom now?" Clarice crouched, cupping his cheeks in her hands. "If you'll have me." He nodded solemnly. "I already did." She kissed his forehead, and Gabe watched them, heart full to the brim. That night they returned to the same resort lobby where it all began. The lights, yes, those lobby lights now glowed steadily overhead, casting a warm, amber hue across the wooden floors and velvet chairs. Gabe had rewired them himself the week before, not because they were broken, because he wanted them to shine brighter than ever. Clarice stood by the fireplace wearing a thick sweater and wool socks, her wedding dress long since traded for comfort. Gabe approached with 2 mugs of cocoa. "I was thinking," she said, "taking hers, we should come here every year. Same day. Just us, even when it's snowing sideways. Especially then, she said, smiling. Because if we can make it through a storm, we can make it through anything. He touched her cheek. We already have. They sat by the fire, their hands intertwined. Eli snoring softly on a couch nearby, his sketchbook still open across his chest. Today's page filled with a stick-figure family now drawn with a house, and a glowing street lamp above it. Gabe looked at Clarice, heart thudding gently in his chest. You ever think, he whispered, how close we came to missing each other? She turned to him, eyes soft. No, I think about how lucky we were to notice. The fire crackled beside them. Outside, snow fell like confetti, and in that quiet, ordinary moment, the kind that never makes headlines but builds a life, they didn't need anything more. Because the lights were on, the hearts were full, and the future, it was theirs. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below.